There was a time when Officer Raymond Briggs didn't even flinch walking into a courtroom. He had swagger in his step, years of experience on the force, a chest full of medals, and enough political backing to brush off any internal complaint like lint on his uniform. He believed, truly believed, that a badge didn't just protect him, it placed him above accountability. But that morning felt different. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension, and as Briggs entered in full uniform, the chatter seemed to die out, not from respect, but from anticipation. He adjusted his tie, sat down, smirked. He was used to this. He'd been through a dozen civil suits before, all bark, no bite. Then the door opened, and she walked in. A tall, black woman in a navy blue suit, military posture in every step. No theatrics, no briefcase, just her presence, and a manila folder in one hand. Briggs blinked. His smirk faded, just slightly. She didn't look like any public defender he'd seen before, too calm, too clean, and definitely not rattled by his reputation. The bailiff announced her name, Major Tanya McCall, and that was the first time in years Briggs leaned back in his chair, not because he was relaxed, but because for the first time he wasn't sure who he was up against. Major Tanya McCall didn't make eye contact as she took her seat. Not with the judge, not with the officers lining the back row, and definitely not with Briggs. She didn't need to, because everything about her presence said, "I already know how this ends." She placed the manila folder neatly on the table, not with a slam, not for effect, just quiet certainty, the kind of certainty that doesn't need to announce itself. The judge adjusted her glasses. Opposing counsel, an older man who'd clearly underestimated the day's matchup, shifted in his chair, clearing his throat as if to fill the silence Tanya had carved open with her stillness. Raymond Briggs crossed his arms. He leaned toward his attorney and muttered under his breath, "She doesn't even look like a lawyer." But Tanya heard. She didn't turn, didn't react. Instead, she calmly unlatched the folder, took out a thin stack of documents, and slid them across the desk toward the clerk. "Ms. McCall," the judge began, "will begin with opening statements." Tanya stood, not rushed, not hesitant. She adjusted her blazer sleeve, cleared her throat once, and walked to the center of the room. Then she just stood. For a moment too long, so long that Briggs rolled his eyes. But then she spoke, and her voice didn't shake. "My client," she said, "was dragged from a sidewalk outside a coffee shop. No weapon, no raised voice, no probable cause, just brown skin, a hoodie, and the misfortune of passing by Officer Raymond Briggs on a slow patrol shift." A soft gasp echoed from the back. "He was thrown to the ground, his head hit pavement. He was bruised physically and publicly, before he even asked what the charge was. And then, there was none." Now the courtroom was dead silent. This isn't about one arrest. This is about a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. And it's about a system that let him believe that, for far too long. Briggs sat up straighter. The smirk was gone now. Tanya glanced at him for the first time, locked eyes, then walked back to her seat without another word. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it rattled every corner of that courtroom. And Briggs, for the first time in 20 years, he felt cold under that badge. Before the courtroom, before the cuffs, before the viral clip that shattered his illusion of control, Raymond Briggs was a name whispered with both fear and admiration in his department. 2 decades on the force, 5 commendations, 1 police brutality complaint that never made it to court, then 2, then 8, none stuck. Every time he was questioned, he called in favors. District attorneys would sigh, internal affairs would stall, and Raymond would walk out of every inquiry with his chin higher than before. He didn't just wear the badge, he weaponized it. The city called him a rough but reliable officer. The news never printed the stories that didn't come with handshakes and press conferences. And most importantly, he had friends. The kind that sat on school boards, the kind that golfed with prosecutors, the kind that signed off on community engagement awards for PR optics. So when Briggs first heard he was being sued over some sidewalk scuffle, he didn't blink, didn't even call his lawyer right away. "It's nothing," he told his wife over dinner. Probably one of those activist types trying to make a name. But what he didn't know was that the woman leading this case wasn't just a lawyer. She was a soldier. Major Tanya McCall didn't come from privilege. She came from systems built to keep women like her out, and she beat every single one of them. She had survived war zones overseas, then walked into Ivy League lecture halls like she owned the place, because every room that tried to make her feel small only made her more precise. After law school, she didn't go corporate. She went military justice, court-martials, whistleblower defense, cases where power wasn't just abused, it was institutionalized. She didn't just study men like Briggs, she dismantled them. Briggs didn't recognize the battlefield, but Tanya did, and she knew that courtroom wasn't a room full of strangers. It was full of patterns. She could already see the juror in seat 4 folding his arms when Briggs smiled. She noticed the young black bailiff nod slightly during her opening, and she heard the whisper from a teenage girl in the back row. "She's gonna tear him apart." Tanya didn't smile. She didn't need to, because Briggs wasn't on trial for just one bad call. He was about to answer for everything he thought no one saw. Court resumed the next morning at exactly 9 a.m. Briggs walked in with his chest out again, but it was tighter this time, his steps just a beat slower. He wasn't smiling, because sometime after midnight, his attorney had shown him what Tanya McCall had submitted into evidence. And it wasn't just body cam footage or witness statements. It was history. Tanya stood at the plaintiff's table, flipping through a heavy binder as calmly as if she were reviewing a menu. She didn't need to look at Briggs. He was already looking at her, trying to read what else she might know, trying to guess what she had found. But there was no telling, because Tanya didn't build her cases on lucky breaks. She built them on paper trails, and Raymond Briggs, for all his bravado, had left more than enough behind. "Your Honor," she began, "today we will be reviewing Officer Briggs's use of force record over the past 14 years. The courtroom shifted. People leaned in. Briggs's attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, those records were not deemed relevant to this incident." Tanya turned. "They are, if they establish a pattern." She opened the binder. Exhibit 3A. A 2012 complaint from a 17-year-old black student detained for loitering while walking home from school. Face down on the pavement, no charges filed. Exhibit 3B. A 2015 arrest in which the body cam footage was mysteriously unavailable after the arrestee claimed a broken wrist. Hospital records confirm the fracture. Exhibit 3C. A 2018 case that was quietly settled with an NDA and a 5-figure payout. Civilian alleges being slammed against a patrol car while handcuffed. Officer on duty, Briggs. She paused. "I can continue." The judge raised a hand. "No need. Proceed." Briggs shifted in his seat, hands no longer folded, jaw clenched. The courtroom wasn't just listening now, it was watching him. Differently. Tanya called her first witness. A man in his early 30s, crisp shirt, slight limp, eyes that didn't blink much. He sat, adjusted the mic, and looked straight ahead. "Name's Elijah Brooks. I was one of the kids from Exhibit 3A. Been 13 years. Still remember the sidewalk texture on my cheek." The room held its breath. "He told me I fit the description." I asked what description. He said, "Black, in a hoodie, near a convenience store." That was it. Briggs stared at the desk. Not because he felt guilt, because someone remembered. Then came the second witness, then the third. Each one had been a statistic, an anecdote, a story that couldn't hold up in court. Until now, because Tanya had done what no one else had. She wove them into a pattern so undeniable that even the judge leaned forward. Briggs's attorney fumbled. "This is character assassination," he said, sweating. But Tanya stayed calm. "No, counselor. This is a mirror, and for the first time, your client has to look at it." Lunch break came and went, but no one left the building. Reporters were texting under benches. Law students were whispering names they'd only seen in footnotes. and the bailiff locked eyes with Tanya as she returned to her seat, giving the slightest nod, not approval, recognition. "You're doing what we've all waited for someone to do." Outside, Briggs's supporters were dwindling. The officers who once sat in the back row had stopped showing up. The department hadn't issued a statement in 2 days. And the mayor's office? Silent. Because Tanya McCall wasn't just dragging Briggs into the light. She was dragging the system that protected him. And yet, Tanya never raised her voice, never barked, never exploded. She didn't need to, because her evidence was louder than any outburst could ever be. And Briggs? He finally stopped looking at her. Because deep down, in a place he'd kept locked for years, he knew it was over. By the time court adjourned that afternoon, the sidewalk outside the courthouse was no longer empty. It was alive, with voices, with cameras, with cardboard signs, with messages scribbled in black marker and angry breath. Accountability isn't an attack. How many others? We see you, Tanya. The hashtag #McCall vs the badge was trending, not just locally, not just in activist circles, nationwide. Inside the courtroom, Tanya gathered her folders with the same calm she'd walked in with. No celebration, no satisfaction, just steady movement. Briggs, meanwhile, avoided every eye in the room. He no longer looked like a man who thought his badge was armor. He looked like a man who'd realized it had only ever been paper. And now, it was burning. That night, the news segments were relentless. Some anchors called Tanya a hero. Others, predictably, called her aggressive, overzealous, dangerously militant. But she didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she sat in her modest apartment, hair pulled back, notes spread across her kitchen table, and opened a worn brown envelope. Inside were letters, not from lawyers, not from journalists, from victims, people who'd never had their day in court, people who'd watched Briggs's face on TV for years, knowing they'd been silenced, ignored, brushed aside. Some handwritten, some typed, some just one line. "Thank you for not letting him walk again." The next morning, Tanya stood outside the courthouse steps, dressed in the same navy suit. She didn't speak to the cameras, but she did stop when a woman in her 50s, eyes full of tears, approached her and said, "He arrested my son when he was 14, made him lie face down in the snow. He still has panic attacks when he sees blue lights." Tanya held her gaze. "This isn't just about what he did. It's about what he made others believe they could get away with." The woman nodded. "Then finish it." Back inside, the court reconvened. Briggs's defense attorney tried a new tone, measured, remorseful, even meek. He suggested the officer had strict habits, that he had occasionally overstepped boundaries in the name of public safety, that his record shouldn't be erased by a single lapse in judgment. Tanya didn't even stand to respond. She simply passed a folder to the clerk. Inside were 6 more complaints, filed, buried, and never heard. Now, they were. At that moment, it became clear to everyone, this trial wasn't about a sidewalk incident anymore. It was about legacy, about precedent, about whether the law still meant anything if the badge got to write it. And Tanya McCall? She wasn't just pressing charges anymore. She was setting fire to the idea that men like Raymond Briggs got to define justice for the rest of us. "Call your next witness," the judge said. Tanya didn't look up immediately. She calmly opened her binder, flipped a few pages, then stopped, closed the folder, and spoke without even glancing at Briggs. "The prosecution calls Camille Watson to the stand." Briggs furrowed his brow. The name didn't register, or maybe it was one he had trained himself to forget. Then she entered, mid-20s, wearing a simple gray dress, back straight, shoulders set. But the kind of stillness that came from rehearsed control, not peace. As she walked toward the witness chair, a murmur rippled through the room. Not because anyone knew her, but because of how quiet Briggs had suddenly become. She took her seat, raised her hand, swore in with a voice barely above a whisper, and then stared at the floor, waiting. Tanya approached the stand. "Ms. Watson, Do you recall the night of January 11th, 2016? Camille closed her eyes once, opened them. Yes. Can you tell the court what happened? Camille hesitated, just long enough for Briggs to shift uncomfortably. I was walking to my car after a closing shift. It was cold. I had my hoodie up. I didn't hear anyone approach me. She swallowed. Then I felt my arm being twisted behind my back. I was slammed against a wall. I thought I was being mugged, until I saw the badge. Gasps, soft, but present. Tanya didn't flinch. Was Officer Briggs the man who detained you that night? Camille nodded, then added quietly, He never told me why. He never read me my rights, just said, this neighborhood doesn't need more late-night trash. Briggs's jaw tightened. Did you file a complaint? Camille nodded. I did. Internal Affairs said there was insufficient evidence. The body cam was malfunctioning. Tanya stepped back, letting the silence linger. What happened to you after that night? Camille stared forward, voice hollow now. I lost my job. I stopped walking alone. I stopped sleeping. For 2 years, I thought I had done something wrong. She finally turned and looked directly at Briggs. You didn't just bruise me. You took years off my life, and you never even remembered my name. Briggs said nothing, but his hands were gripping the arms of his chair, knuckles white. Because now the courtroom wasn't a courtroom, it was a reckoning. And Tanya, she didn't say another word. She simply walked back to her table, sat down, and let Camille's voice echo in every corner of that room. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in the silence left behind by someone who refuses to forget. The courtroom was heavy with stillness after Camille Watson's testimony. Even the judge took an unusually long pause before calling for a recess. Briggs didn't look at anyone, not his attorney, not Tanya, not the rows of eyes now watching him like they were waiting for a confession he'd never give. He rubbed the side of his face with one hand, as if trying to wipe off the truth. But the truth was now baked into the walls. After the break, Tanya rose without a binder. No papers, no flash, just presence. She stepped into the center of the courtroom, closer to the jury than before. Her voice didn't change, still calm, still deliberate. But her words, they shifted the ground beneath Briggs's chair. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put aside badges for a moment. Let's put aside legal procedure, even the word excessive. Let's talk about habit. The room went still. What do you do when you think no one's watching? When the paperwork never pushes back? When the system not only forgives, but forgets on your behalf? That's when you meet the real person. She turned toward Briggs. And Officer Briggs didn't act out of panic or fear. He acted with calculation. Because he knew the odds were in his favor. He counted on silence, on broken body cams, on no one remembering. She paused, until someone did. She looked at the jury now. The man you see before you didn't stumble into misconduct. He built a career around what he thought he could get away with. And the people he silenced, they're not just victims. They're footnotes he never expected to see again. Briggs shifted, finally spoke, not loudly, but sharply. This is a circus. She's turning this into a damn circus. Tanya didn't flinch, didn't look at him. No, Officer Briggs, this is not a circus. This is what justice looks like when it finally has a voice louder than yours. The judge called for order. Briggs sat back, but this time not with a smirk, not with confidence. He looked small, contained, and suddenly aware of how very loud a quiet woman could be. That night, Tanya didn't celebrate. She walked out the courthouse's back exit, but as she passed through the staff hallway, a custodian stopped sweeping. An older black man, wrinkles near his eyes that had seen too much. He nodded toward her. Took long enough, huh? She gave the faintest smile. Not long enough to stop, and kept walking, because she knew the case wasn't over yet. But Raymond Briggs's armor, it was already cracking. 3 days into the trial, things began to shift, but not inside the courtroom. Outside, the district attorney's office released a vague statement about respecting due process. The chief of police appeared in a brief, unconvincing TV interview praising Officer Briggs's years of loyal service. And behind closed doors, emails were flying, texts were being deleted, PR advisors were on call through the night because Tanya hadn't just cornered a man, she had cornered an entire system. And systems don't go down quietly. Briggs's defense team began changing tactics. Suddenly their tone was softer, more emotional. His lawyer spoke of trauma from years on the streets, of a dedicated officer pushed too far by today's angry culture. They tried to spin him as a relic of a harsher time, not a predator but a man abandoned by a changing world. It was an act, but one they knew had worked before. Tanya, meanwhile, said nothing. She didn't need to, because her next witness didn't speak from theory. She spoke from inside the machine. A retired dispatcher, white, late 50s, hair pulled back tight, voice steady, no nonsense. She took the stand, cleared her throat and said, "I used to route Officer Briggs's patrols. I also used to flag internal reports that never made it past sergeants." The room froze. There were patterns. We all saw them. But no one said a word. You don't speak up unless you want to lose your pension. She looked straight at the jury. But that woman over there, she said what we never had the courage to. Briggs's attorney objected, but it didn't matter, because the jury wasn't listening to him anymore. They were watching Tanya. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just nodded, once, as if to say, I don't need to win loudly. I just need to finish what no one else started. And as the judge called for a short break, a reporter outside typed a tweet that would go viral before the next recess. This trial is no longer about proving guilt. It's about whether institutions will admit they were built to look the other way. If you've ever wondered why real accountability feels so rare, why it takes years of silence to reach a moment this loud, then ask yourself this. What happens when someone finally stops whispering and names everything out loud? By the fourth day, the courthouse didn't belong to the state anymore. It belonged to the people. The crowd outside had doubled, then tripled. Local organizers set up tables handing out "Justice for Camille" stickers. Old protest signs were dusted off and rewritten. And above it all hung one phrase on a long white banner, stretched across metal barricades. He wore the badge. She carried the truth. Media coverage had turned. What started as neutral reporting had sharpened its edge. Segments once filled with alleged misconduct now said things like, "A long overdue reckoning for a system that thrived on suppression." Tanya McCall is doing what IA never did. How many other Briggs are still wearing the badge? Even national outlets picked it up. And that's when it started to sting. Because the pressure wasn't just on Briggs anymore. It was on the department, the mayor's office, the DA, anyone who had signed off on silence for the past 20 years. Briggs sat in court that day with his blazer wrinkled and his eyes bloodshot. He hadn't spoken to the press, hadn't released a statement, but the silence wasn't power anymore. It was isolation. Inside the courtroom, Tanya didn't present new evidence. She didn't need to. All she did was play a single audio recording, a dispatcher log from a late-night shift in 2017. The clip was grainy, faint background static. Then, Unit 29 reporting suspicious male near gas station. Description? Just says black, hoodie, walking slow. And the next line. Briggs's voice. Copy. Let's go teach him what suspicious looks like. No objection came. No defense was offered. Because what do you say when your own voice convicts you better than any prosecutor ever could? That night, a former sergeant, retired just last year, made an anonymous appearance on a live news panel, voice disguised, face blurred. We all knew who Briggs was. We joked that he was HR proof. We warned new hires to let him handle the heavy ones. He paused. But what I never expected was that it would be a woman, a black woman, who'd finally take him down in court.
Briggs's old allies, gone. City council members quietly deleted tweets of support. One commissioner gave an awkward press conference about re-evaluating previous personnel decisions. The mayor released a brief statement. "The city does not condone abuse of authority. We will monitor the proceedings closely."
And in the courtroom the next day, when Tanya entered, she didn't just walk in as an attorney. She walked in as a symbol. But Tanya wasn't interested in symbols. She wanted change. And symbols don't bring change. Pressure does. So she looked to the jury, calmly, and said, "There's only one thing louder than a siren, and that's a story that refuses to stay buried. If you've ever felt like truth doesn't stand a chance against power, watch what happens when power starts running out of places to hide." By the 5th day of trial, Briggs's defense team had changed everything. No more polished arrogance, no more courtroom theatrics. Now they rolled in remorse. His lawyer delivered opening remarks with a trembling voice, spoke of the emotional toll the trial had taken on Officer Briggs, how the mental weight of the badge had aged him, how he had dedicated his life to protecting a community that now seeks to shame him. The jury didn't blink. But Tanya? She was already waiting for it. Then they played their hand. They put Briggs on the stand. For the first time, he would speak. It was a risk, a desperate one, but it was all they had left. He sat with hunched shoulders and trembling hands, looked smaller, softer, and the room was so still, you could hear the hum of the courtroom lights. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said. "It was never about race. It was about doing my job." He paused, calculated. "I came up in a rough city. We were trained to react fast. Sometimes that means acting before things escalate." He sighed, voice soft. "I wish I'd done things differently, but I was just trying to keep people safe." Then the final touch. Tears. One, just one, traced the edge of his cheek. The courtroom held its breath. Briggs's attorney looked to the jury. "Compassion is not weakness. Sometimes justice means remembering that people are more than their mistakes." He sat, and for a split second, just one, someone in the gallery nodded. Then Tanya stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't challenge his tears, didn't question his past. She simply walked to the evidence screen, clicked the remote, and played a silent video. Grainy footage, Briggs, in uniform, a hand on a teenage boy's neck, a shove, then a punch, before backup even arrived. The boy didn't swing, didn't move, just collapsed. No audio, no excuses, just images. When the screen faded to black, Tanya turned. Her voice was flat. "Was that keeping people safe too?" Briggs swallowed, didn't answer. The jury watched him now like he was a man trying to cry his way out of an earthquake. Tanya took one step forward. "You don't get to weep in the ashes when you were the one holding the match." Silence. "You don't get to plead for grace when you built your career on denying it." She looked to the judge. No further questions. Briggs sat back, shattered. His image, of the tough protector, of the broken officer, collapsed under the weight of his own evidence, because Tanya never needed to destroy him. She only needed to reveal him. If you've ever wondered why the truth moves slow, watch what happens when it finally picks up speed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, not because they were unsure, but because they knew the weight of what their decision meant. Briggs didn't just represent himself. He represented every name, every file, every unanswered complaint that had been quietly shelved while victims found themselves labeled as angry, emotional, unreliable. And Tanya? She sat by the window during deliberation. No notes, no preparation, just stillness. When the clerk returned, everything stopped. In the case of the People vs. Raymond Briggs, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. There were no cheers, just breath. Finally exhaled. Briggs didn't move, didn't cry, because even he knew. The courtroom wasn't what beat him, the truth did. Outside, the crowd stood in silence as Tanya emerged. Cameras clicked, microphones reached for her, but she didn't rush toward them. Instead, she looked past the lights, past the headlines, and spotted a group of young girls at the back, black, brown, notebooks in hand, eyes wide. One of them mouthed, "You made them see us." Tanya nodded once, because that was the only answer that mattered. Later that week, she was asked in an interview, "Why did you take this case?" She paused, then said, "Because silence doesn't protect us. It only trains people to ignore us, and I got tired of being polite about injustice." Raymond Briggs was stripped of his badge, his pension, his legacy. But what mattered more? He was no longer invisible to the people he once believed would never be heard. And Tanya, she didn't run for office, didn't sign a book deal, didn't go viral. She went back to her quiet life, her firm, her mission, but the ripple she left, it didn't fade, it turned into a wave. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from power. It comes from someone brave enough to say, "Not this time."